Hey y'all, I'm Lauren and welcome to Cantina Cast. Today I am talking about The Edge of Balance Part 3, written by Shima Shinya and Daniel Jose Older. This is the latest release of the High Republic Phase 3 manga series, which started back in Phase 1 and it has continued with volumes 1 and 2 from Phase 1. And then we had The Edge of Balance Precedent, which came out in Phase 2. And then volume 3 is the first volume of the phase 3 editions of this manga. Looks like we are going to be getting another edition of this manga. We'll at least be getting a volume 4 coming up. I was looking forward to this volume because we did have a continuation from the story that was established in the phase 1 editions of the series. And then we also got to tie in the Edge of Balance Precedent, which was my personal favorite volume of this series. So I was glad to see all of that coming together in this volume. What's nice about this series is that if you're not following the entire High Republic readings, then you can still enjoy this series. Now, you won't get all of the context that you could possibly get. There will be some stuff that isn't really going to be fully explained in this series because there is kind of an expectation with the High Republic that people are reading multiple different forms of media within this kind of overarching group of series that they have going on. But you could still read this manga series by itself and still get kind of a flavor of the High Republic and kind of what it's all about without having to read any of the longer commitment novels. So that is a nice thing about it. If you're thinking about checking out the High Republic and seeing if it's something you're interested in, I feel like this series is a good place to kind of see if you like the sort of vibe that it's giving because you get a little taste of pretty much everything that's going on without getting super into the weeds. I also feel like this story does stand on its own if you want it to, because these characters that it follows, you're getting these characters' full story within this series. It's not like with some other High Republic stuff where you're getting a certain character story across comics and books and, kind of like lots of different places. With this one, the characters that are established in the manga, they are specifically manga characters, if that makes sense. And I really enjoyed this volume. It pretty much delivered everything I was hoping that it would. We got to continue on with that series. We did get to pick up with some characters that I really like, especially Arkoff and Sav. They're my two favorite characters from this series. And I like the direction that it's going in. I'm definitely intrigued for what's going to happen in the next volume. And I appreciate the specific tie ins that we got to the Edge of Balance precedent. So that's my general thoughts about the series as a whole and about this particular volume. At this point, I am going to start talking about spoilers for volume 3. So if you haven't read any of the previous volumes, or if you're looking to read volume 3 and you haven't gotten to it yet, now is your time to turn back. When volume 3 opens, we see Lily in meditation and we see how far she's come as a character since the beginning of volume 2. Volume 2 was a pretty pivotal time for her. She learned a lot from Sav. She had to kind of figure out how to let go of her pre-planning tendencies where she wanted to kind of plan for every possible outcome, and then Sav had to explain to her that that's not really always going to be possible, and sometimes you need to learn to let go of your plans. And Lily learned a lot in volume 2. So when we open volume 3, we definitely have the sense that she as a person has changed. One thing specifically that she says is when she's thinking about her Padawan Kieran that she lost, she's thinking about how instead of avoiding the difficult emotions that come along with her grief, she's going to acknowledge them and she's going to sit with them. And that, of course, is a pretty big departure from some other Jedi characters that we see throughout Star Wars, where they're very much repressing their emotions. And that's one thing that I've really appreciated about the High Republic Jedi is that they try to be much more mindful of their emotions without pushing them down. They're still wary of them, I would say. They don't just think that you shouldn't address overwhelming emotions or unpleasant emotions, but they do have a little bit of a different relationship with them. And I kind of feel like they see the value in them a little bit more that we don't really necessarily get with Jedi and other eras. And Lily's a good example of that when she's talking about how she's dealing with the loss of her Padawan. And when she's thinking about that, we do see Kieran's grave and we see all of the graves of everybody else that was lost during that attack on Banshee that happened in volume 2. So they lost a pretty significant chunk of the community. It looks like they lost almost everybody. That Nihil attack that happened in volume 2, the effects of that are still very much felt at the beginning of volume 3. Everybody who previously had gone to Coruscant after the fall of Starlight Beacon also returns to Banshee in this volume. So that would be Arkoff, also the younglings that Lily was working with too. So they come back and basically you get the sense that they were released from Coruscant after being recalled for the Guardian protocols. So now they're back on Banshee. They're ready to kind of pick back up where they left off, working with Lily and trying to help protect Banshee from another attack. And they're not only trying to protect Banshee, but they're also rebuilding it because there was a significant amount of damage done from the previous attack. Once Arkoff is back, Lily and Arkoff have a good conversation where, again, we see the evidence of the fact that Lily has grown as a character. She talks to Arkoff about how now she views an unpredictable situation as an opportunity to grow. And previously, she would have had a lot of anxiety about unpredictability. Something else in this conversation with Arkoff is she does ask him about Aslan Rel. And this was a great callback to the Edge of Balance precedent where we learn about the relationship between Arkoff and Aslan. Arkoff was actually previously Aslan's master, and Arkoff carried a bunch of guilt about what happened to Aslan after his encounter with the Nameless. Quick recap from the Edge of Balance precedent is that Aslan has a close call with the Nameless and is pretty much never the same afterwards. He psychologically really goes downhill. At one point, he has to actually go live in a facility to be cared for because he can't care for himself anymore. He's just completely lost in the hallucinations from the Nameless. It's almost like the encounter was so bad that he just kind of got stuck there. In other parts of the High Republic Phase 3, we've seen Yoda working with Aslan to try to learn more about the Nameless, but it's very tricky because Aslan is unstable. He's very much in the dark side now. He's no longer a Jedi at all. And so Arkoff in Volume 3, he has some mixed feelings about all of this because he remembers everything that Aslan went through in the Edge of Balance precedent. Arkoff actually witnessed a lot of that. And so this is something that does have Arkoff really ruminating on the past throughout this volume as he's thinking about Aslan, especially because Aslan is going to make an appearance in Volume 3 coming up in a few scenes. The reason that Aslan ends up going to Banshee is because while Lily and everybody is working on rebuilding, a very strange encounter happens when one of the people that was turned into wood by the Drengir back in volume 1, one of them seems to have like risen, like they're pretty much a zombie now, and shows up where everybody is working on all these rebuilding projects. And so that totally freaks everybody out. Lily calls Coruscant and explains the situation and is like, something is not right, obviously. And this is when Yoda talks to Aslan and says, okay, there's some sort of Drengir activity still going on Banshee. This is probably going to put your journal at risk, which we learned in the Edge of Balance precedent. Aslan Rel's journal is buried on Banshee for safekeeping. So Yoda's trying to get Aslan to come and retrieve his journal from Banshee. Aslan is very reluctant to do this, and he asks Yoda pretty much the question that I was thinking, which is basically, why do I have to do this? Like, just because I wrote it doesn't mean that it has to be me specifically that goes to retrieve it. So I was kind of asking myself the same thing, but you know that Yoda doesn't always show his cards up front. I'm sure he has his reasons, which maybe will be revealed in Volume 4. Now, Aslan certainly does help out when he goes to Banshee in Volume 3, but the question as to why it had to be him, like why Yoda wanted it to be him, that isn't really totally answered in volume 3, so I'm thinking maybe that will come up soon. But Yoda does convince Aslan to return to Banshee, and Yoda goes with him as well. So this results in Aslan and Arkoff also meeting again for the first time since all of that happened in the Edge of Balance precedent between the two of them. In this conversation, Arkoff does make it clear that he believes that Aslan isn't totally past saving from the dark side yet. And he still has hope that Aslan will turn more towards the light. Aslan isn't buying it. He's still having hallucinations. And he just recently, in another High Republic reading, killed a bunch of people. So Aslan's kind of like, I think that might be wishful thinking on your part. And Arkoff is, still keeping the faith no matter what, which of course, very typical of a master to never lose faith in their former Padawan no matter what. So even though Arkoff might be having a little bit of wishful thinking, it is very fitting for a Jedi master to feel this way. By the time Yoda and Aslan get there, it's a good thing that they showed up because there's actually been more wood zombies that have showed up during the time that they're waiting on them to come. But one thing that they've since realized is that these wood zombies, they're not malicious and they're not trying to hurt anybody. They seem like they're trying to communicate something, and none of the characters have figured out what that is yet. The Nihil mad scientist Baron Bulin, he is aware of the fact that these wood zombies are showing up on Banshee that everybody previously thought had been killed by the Drengir. I'm guessing the way that Baron Bulin became aware of this was because of Mr. Zaret, who was a Nihil spy that was living on Banshee back in Volume 1 and 2. It's not totally confirmed if Mr. Zaret is the only Nihil spy or if Baron Bulin got his information elsewhere, but that was my guess. Once Bulin finds out, though, about the wood zombies, he contacts Niv Drendow, who is another Nihil scientist who is kind of like an underling of Bulin's, and he instructs him to go to Banshee and see what's going on with all of this. The Nihil haven't totally given up on the fact that the Drengir might be of some use to them, and so Bulin is trying to learn everything he can about the Drengir. And the whole wood zombie thing, it is a Drengir thing that was specific to Banshee. It didn't happen in any of the other places that the Drengir attacked. So even though Niv Drendow is planning on going to Banshee, fortunately, Sav, she already suspects that the Nihil are going to be heading to Banshee soon. And the reason she suspects this is because the way that Banshee's moon works is that the orbit of that moon is going to be passing into the occlusion zone temporarily, which would allow the Nihil to land on the moon. And then once it exits the occlusion zone, then they would be in Republic space. Long story short, it's a strategic location for Nihil to launch attacks into Republic space from that moon. So Sav has already put all that together, and she's planning on also meeting the Nihil on Banshee's moon to try to stop them from getting to Banshee. And Sav is very much aware of Aslan's journal as well. She mentions we got to really be careful about the Nihil getting here and getting Aslan's journal. And so not only is there that whole military strategic thing to it, but there's also the fact that if they get Aslan's journal, and especially if they destroy it or use it for their own gain, that could be really bad because what Aslan had written in that journal, the Republic really needs that information about the Nameless. When Sav goes to Banshee's moon, she also brings Zizi the droid, which we've seen throughout this whole series, super cute little droid. And she also brings with her Shosho, who is an indigenous Bansheean. They're little tiny bird creatures, super cute. We've seen them kind of pop up every now and then throughout this series. We had one sort of bonus story with them at the end of volume 1. They've also had a couple cameos. So you kind of always see them around in the background, sometimes doing their own thing, sometimes they're helping out. But Shosho wants to go with Sav to help Sav defend against the Nihil. They make a friend named Zimtok, who is another small creature that is actually an animal that can use the force. That is an animal that lives on Banshee's moon. Super cute little duo, but unfortunately what happens is when Niv Drendow gets to Banshee's moon, he's like, okay, we got to feed the Nameless. So everybody, if you find any force sensitive creature, bring it here so we can feed it to the Nameless. So Zemtok gets captured. Now, thank God, I'm pretty sure that Zemtok is going to be okay. It sounds like in volume 4, the objective is going to be to rescue Zemtok. I don't think they're going to kill Zemtok. I think that would be like way too brutal for this series. So I'm pretty sure Zemtok's going to be okay. But I did not appreciate the cliffhanger of Zemtok being captured. But it is made clear that in volume 4, everybody's gonna go rescue Zimtalk. So I think it's gonna be okay, but heads up, Zimtalk does unfortunately get captured. But after that, all of the Nihil, they do manage to successfully make it to Banshee. Meanwhile, while all of that group of Nihil and the Nameless are headed to Banshee, something that's also happening on Banshee is that more wood zombies show up and also a Drengir shows up and they warn everybody about the blight that is coming. The blight has been mentioned in the other phase 3 readings. So it's mentioned in Temptation of the Force. It's talked about in the young adult book from phase 3, which is called Defy the Storm. And the blight, it's a new thing that's been introduced in phase 3 that's kind of just like one more problem for the Jedi and the Republic to have to deal with. Personally, I'm not like a super huge fan of it being introduced because I kind of feel like it's sort of like too many things going at once. We have the Nihil, we have the Drengir that have come back, and then we also have the Blight. So I'm kind of like, I don't know where this is all going. I'm guessing that we're going to learn that all three of these groups are related to each other in some way. Now, that hasn't really been fully explained how that is. So we still have a lot to go there. I'm a little kind of apprehensive about it because to me, it just feels like kind of late in the game to reintroduce this big of an adversary. I mean, it's not even something that can be defeated, it's literally a blight. So I don't know. It's gonna be interesting to see where that goes. But that is why the Drengir shows up on Banshee again, is because the blight is coming. The Drengir and the wood zombies, that's why they've all come back, is because they're trying to warn the other people on Banshee about the blight. It does turn out that the presence of the blight, that is what unites the Drengir with the Jedi, because previously the Drengir and the Jedi have hated each other, they fought each other. The Drengir are very dark side creatures, but with the whole thing about the blight, it's kind of like Drengir and Jedi versus Nihil, because Marchion Ro, which we find out in other readings, Marchion Ro is partly responsible for spreading the blight. We do see the Drengir teaming up with the Jedi in this particular volume of this series, because once the Nameless actually shows up, it's pretty much everybody against the Nameless because the Drengir hate the Nameless as well. The Nameless does the same thing to the Drengir that it does to the Jedi. That's cool that we actually do see a common ground between the Drengir and the Jedi. So it ends up being Lily, all of her people, the younglings, Arkov, everybody that's on Banshee, the Drengir, the random lone Drengir. Then we also have Yoda and we have Aslan Rel all teaming up to fight the Nameless. Oh, and of course, you can't forget the native Bansheeans. They also team up as well. So that made me really happy to see, because that was one thing I was suspecting, is that maybe we're going to have like an Ewok kind of moment with the Bansheeans. So I was really glad that that happened. And so what ends up happening is the Bansheeans, they managed to lead a Nameless away from the Jedi, kind of fight the Nameless, or actually, it was two of them. They fight two of the Nameless away from the Jedi, so the Jedi aren't affected by the Nameless. And once the Nameless isn't so close to the Jedi, that allows them to be killed more easily. And when they lead the Nameless away, they actually fall into a bunker that they were previously building as part of the rebuilding effort. But the Nameless falls in there, allows them to kill it that way without the Jedi actually being harmed by it. And then the third Nameless that's there is defeated by Aslan Rel. And when Aslan Rel defeats the Nameless, it's super cool because it's running up. It looks like it's about to get him. And he has to make a decision where he's like, okay, I did not come here to be engulfed by fear, is what he says, which is such a cool line. And he actually uses the Force to like explode the Nameless, is what it looked like in the art, which sounds a little crazy. It is a little crazy. Aslan Rel is a little crazy. So not surprising that he would do something like that, honestly. But he does manage to kind of push past his hallucinations just with pure determination. The way that it comes across in this scene is that he's just sick and tired of being consumed by this. And so once he's actually confronted with it, that gives him the motivation and the strength to be able to face it once and for all. So I thought that was so cool how that was handled. And I really liked it that the solution, it really just came from inside Aslan himself. It just came from him choosing another way and being like, you know what? I'm not going to give into this anymore. I've spent my whole life dealing with this and fighting this, and I'm going to rise above it right now. And he just made that decision. It worked. That was powerful enough to actually be able to get past that extreme fear that the nameless produces in people. So that was really a highlight of the story for me, was seeing Aslan Rel defeat the nameless. So I'm really hoping that we get more moments like that with him in the future. I would love it if maybe in another book we get kind of like an on the page explanation, because that is kind of like the nature of manga. Is It's like with comics, like, you get people's dialogue and you get the images, but sometimes things aren't as thoroughly explained as they could be in a novel, and that's just the nature of the media. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just kind of, it leaves up a little bit more room to interpretation. So I would like it if we do get an on the page explanation that kinda goes into what exactly Aslan was thinking, kind of like what he had to access, maybe enable for him to actually be powerful enough. It does sound like it wasn't the dark side, because he does in this scene make it clear that he doesn't want to live the same way that he's been living anymore, which makes me think that maybe he's tired of being a dark side user and kind of feels like maybe that isn't really serving him anymore. So I'm really excited to see where his character is going to go after this one. And where this manga ends up leaving off is we do see that Sav returns and she does let them know about what happened to Zimtok. And so it sounds like I was saying earlier, it sounds like in volume 4, we're going to see everybody go to rescue Zimtok from the Nihil. I really appreciated this volume just for not only all of the information that it gives us about maybe what it takes to defeat the Nihil, like what we see from Aslan and what we see from the Bansheeans, that whole side of things, which is good information to have. But I also really appreciated the storytelling that we get. I really appreciated the character growth that we see that Lily has had throughout the series. I appreciated a lot the fact that we see Aslan maybe getting ready to turn back towards the light. At the very least, we know that he's fed up with being afraid of the nameless and living the way that he has been living. So I thought that was a super cool turning point for him. And we also see some growth from Arkoff too, because throughout this volume, we've seen him kind of living in the past, and at one point he does have to confront that by talking with Aslan. And so I really appreciated that we saw his character trying to turn the page on his regret that he's been having too. So this volume has me super excited for volume 4. I've got to say, this series has become a must read for me from the High Republic. So let me know in the comments what you've thought of this one, if you've read it yet, and also what you've thought of the series as a whole. And thanks so much for joining, y'all. I hope that y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.